be seated.
Your Honour, today's panel is the number of bishops who, generally speaking, represent areas which are smaller than the metropolitan bishops.
Generally speaking.
Well, I didn't want to offend Archbishop Porteous of Hobart.
Thank you.
So I put it in those terms.
Gentlemen, you need to be sworn. Will you all take an oath on the Bible?
So
Would you stand for me, please? And just make sure you have a hand on the Bible. And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
The evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
The evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
Nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat.
Thank you. Can I start with you, Archbishop Prowse? You're the, perhaps if you could tell us your full name.
I'm Archbishop Christopher Charles Prowse.
And you're the Archdiocese, you're Archbishop or Bishop of Canberra?
I'm the Archbishop of Canberra and Goulburn and the Apostolic Administrator for the Wagga Diocese.
Thank you. Now, you were ordained as a priest in the Archdiocese of Melbourne in August 1980.
Correct.
And since that time, you have been an auxiliary bishop in that archdiocese.
Correct.
And in June 2008, you were appointed the bishop for the Diocese of Sale.
Correct.
And you held that position until you took up your current position as Archbishop in 2013.
Correct.
Thank you. Now, your archdiocese is what size?
Well, there's 56 parishes. It's geographically a very big diocese. It incorporates colonial, I suppose you could say, or farming areas, then goes down to coastal areas, the alpine region of Australia, and also some of the big wheat and wool areas like Yass and Goulburn.
You have 50-odd schools in your area?
Yes, 56 schools. Both half of them are in the Australian Capital Territory and the other half in regional New South Wales.
Thank you. Now, what engagement does your archdiocese have these days with children?
Well, we have an engagement with the children when they come to us, particularly at schools. Clearly, we educate a very substantial percentage of the schools in the whole region. They're not all Catholic. People would choose the Catholic school. Our engagement with them is through their teachers and through the activities. Then, of course, with children in our parishes, there'd be youth groups. Those that come to the Mass on Sunday in family groups. So across the board there would be children family groups because of our commitment to marriage and family life. So it's quite universal spread.
Are you funded to deliver services other than in relation to education?
Well, we are involved also with Catholic Care, we call it, which is social welfare. Then there's Mary Mead, which is for children particularly, and that is both funded by governments and also by local fundraising and church funding as well.
Tell us about Mary Mead.
Mary Mead is a agency of the Archdiocese of Canberra and Goulburn which particularly cares for children and there's orphanages and foster families. There's outreach to the community in that particular area.
So orphanages are run through
the orphanages as such, no, they are not there, but the foster families and what have you, I suppose is better to call them, linking up with foster families, households, so the children are given safe places in that setting.
So I take it from your description that the vast majority of children who come into contact with your archdiocese are through schools?
Correct.
Thank you. Now, you've provided a statement, Archbishop, and, Your Honour, it might be appropriate at this stage to tender the volume of statements as one exhibit.
We'll make that exhibit 59.
Thank you. Give that with you.
I have both my statements. The one is
just dealing firstly with the one which is dated the 4th of November.
Correct, yes.
The contents of that true and correct?
Correct, yes, it is.
Thank you. Now, you indicate in your statement, this is at paragraph 8, that you established in September 2015 the Institute for Professional Standards and Safeguarding.
Correct.
What prompted the establishment of that body?
Probably three factors. The first factor was that I was new to the Archdiocese. I felt that coming in new as an Archbishop, it would be important for me to review that which had already taken place by my predecessor. I think it's healthy to have a full review. I asked people outside the diocese from the National Committee to come in and and do a review. That happened. Their major suggestion was that we should have a whole of Archdiocese approach. The second factor would have been that, particularly here, the Royal Commission. I was made the Archbishop whilst the Royal Commission had already been going for about a year, was listening very carefully, was trying to respond as I could dynamically to that which was being revealed here, and very grateful to the Royal Commission for opening up areas where we in the Catholic Church have somewhat have we needed to have a mirror placed in front of us, which I think the Royal Commission is and will do, which I think is very important for us. Thirdly, my own personal experience too. I've been with victims and their families over the years in the different dioceses I've been in. There's obviously individual stories, but there was a commonality, almost I'd say demand from the victims, which resonates deep in my heart. Basically saying, will you please listen to us and believe our story? Secondly, can you assure us that that person who abused me is no longer in the employ of the church? Thirdly, that can you provide some practical help to me, because I have an open wound that will not heal, and I need some practical compensation, I need some counselling. Fourthly, can we trust you? Can you assure us that the Catholic Church now and in the future is different to that which it was in the past, particularly with the relationship to children, with safeguarding of children? So those factors all came together when I first arrived, and has made it such a priority in my governance of the diocese ever since, and will in the future.
How does the establishment of that institute satisfy those various matters you described?
It satisfies it in the following matter. First of all, I think I've got a more... I'm taking greater responsibility. Before, it was rather diffuse. I wasn't really sure what was going on. It was delegated to different agencies, which were all doing a very good job, but I felt that there should be a coming together so that I could take a greater sense of ownership and responsibility, know what's happening, monitor it. And so I needed some institute that would do that. Also, the educative dimension is very important to me. Certainly responding to allegations that come up promptly and professionally, and working in with government agencies, which I've tried to sophisticate in recent times. But also to be able to go ahead with programs, protocols, safeguarding, to oversee that, and also get particularly lay people in who have great expertise in this matter, so that I can work in with them and not becoming some sort of solitary figure making decisions from on high, but as a determination in me to work with the competent people, mainly lay people, to be able to change a culture, greater transparency and accountability for what's happening, and to be able to do that in the public forum in this tragic moment, this chilling moment of the Catholic Church, with these statistics coming up, particularly the last few weeks, which have chilled us to the core, and me personally have been heartbreaking to see these statistics nationally. But at the very same time, to be able to say, well, let us go forward in a completely different way, that is a way that we can hold our head up high, and to be able to say, we're learning from this. We've got a long way to go, but we're on the way. And I feel that this institute represents all that.
The institute is a combination of your Catholic Care organisation?
Yes, it's a central body. It employs some people there who would then audit, monitor, working with these agencies.
Perhaps if I could just stop you there. As I understand it, establishing that institute was to bring together areas within the Archdiocese that generally delivered services to children.
Yes.
And what were those agencies, or what are those agencies?
Well, first of all, the biggest one is the Catholic education. And then there's the Catholic care, the Mary Mead. There's the congregational schools, which run their own national responses. But, I still want to know what's happening and to be informed and to monitor that. And then, of course, our parishes and particularly our priests and those that work with children to ensure that all their working with children checks are there, up to date, that there's when we do get complaints, that they're handled professionally in a way that is not in any shape or form victims feeling fobbed off, and to work particularly with the Ombudsman and the police at times to working together. I'd say we're on the way. We've got a long way to go, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
So the effect of amalgamating, if I can use that word, those agencies under the Institute, is that subject to the various legislative requirements, there's a commonality of approaches?
Yeah, 2 points, if I might. The first one, amalgamation, perhaps is a rather strong word. I want to delegate responsibly. I feel that's the word that I would use. But secondly, working in with the agencies and the government agencies, there's still a long way to go there. For instance, my archdiocese straddles 2 governmental constituencies, New South Wales excuse me, and ACT. And with my brother bishops from New South Wales some time ago, we wrote to the New South Wales government wanting the reportable conduct policies to make sure they include all religious. So that's there. But there's a slightly different legislation in the ACT, and I have, with one of the survivors of sex abuse that we're working with on our consulting, we're now petitioning and have been petitioning the ACT government to raise the bar on the reportable conduct policies to be equated with New South Wales. New South Wales, I think, has got a high standard. I'd like not to straddle 2 constituencies that are different on this. I want there to be a consistency on both. So I've been trying to respond as best I can to those issues as they arise.
I think the bill's been passed, hasn't it, the ACT?
It's on the way. I think it's July this year, but there's still some amendments and fine-tuning I'd like to do to make sure that that we really do have a consistency. I don't want to be running an agency of child protection in the Catholic Church in my archdiocese where we've got all these sort of hoops to go to say, well, New South Wales says, but ACT says that. I would think also, without just off the top of my head too, that this is a big issue nationally too, that we have states and the national government a consistent policies which is a very high standard. But I just say that I don't have much to prove that, but I get the sense that what's happening in my part might be symptomatic of what's a challenge today nationally.
You've said that the creation of the Institute has resulted in more transparency.
Yes.
Is it the case that there is more information or decisions that are being made public than weren't before?
Yes, well, our protocols, I'm just thinking of the website, I'm thinking of people's access to our policies are there, updating them continually, moving them from draft to policy.
Archbishop, what's different from before you brought together those agencies into the Institute?
Well, things like access to how do I make a complaint, how do I do it, and where's the document? So
that wasn't available before? Well,
it was, but it was hard to find. Now it's easy to find. It's easy to find on the website, and so people can access it electronically or contact us. I want to make it easy for very vulnerable people who have a story to tell and who come from an experience, many of them in the past, where they felt that the church wasn't taking moral responsibility, many of them been very happy, but some of them are saying, listen, we had to stand behind a whole barrage of lawyers to get to you, to the ear of the bishop. So I want to be able to change that culture, and I'm trying my best to do that with the great expertise of lay people.
Do you publish statistics now that you didn't publish before the Institute was established?
That's something that I'd like to do actually as a consequence of these sessions here. When I go back to my archdiocese, I have it in my heart to go around to the diocese in regional areas for listening sessions. I want to gather the victims and their families. I mean, it's been like a bushfire going through the Catholic Church, or a tsunami effect on faith and on people's trust of us. And I don't want to be sort of seen as some bureaucrat behind an office. So I want to go out, and I find the victims over the years, the ones I've met, I call them wounded healers. I don't think we can go ahead without the wounded healers standing alongside us, walking together, correcting us, directing us, working in with us. I think that's what I want to do, because there's huge wisdom already there. And indeed, it's part of our Catholic culture to be alongside the periphery, the vulnerable, the children. And when I read those statistics, and the average age was only 11.
But Archbishop, the Church has had procedures in place for 20 years to deal with this. Your evidence is suggesting that it's a very recent phenomenon.
Well, it is recent in the sense that I think that it's not as in-house as perhaps it might have been when Towards Healing first came along. And but now we're talking about working immediately with the Ombudsman, for instance. You know, when a reportable offence or allegation is given, immediately we're tic-tacking with the local Ombudsman, and that helps.
Because you have to, Archbishop. You're required by law to do that.
Yes, but it's a law that I not only support, but trying to promote even more so in the ACT, so that it becomes a knee-jerk reaction that the Church is not working on its own. It's working with the governmentalities at the time. And I'm really looking forward to the recommendations from the Royal Commission, so that these doors will be opened even further. And I'm looking forward to that. But at the same time, I'm putting together a structure which I hope has got a lot of open doors and a lot of open windows. It's quite a dynamic one. It's not a closed shop. And I feel also it's just not the change of policy, but it's also the change of hearts and minds. This is a big issue as well.
Bishop, it no doubt is in your thinking, and indeed all of you who are here today and others, that the Church has had to confront, at least as you put it in the last few weeks, the horror of what has actually occurred. There will be many people who wonder why it was that it took a Royal Commission for the Church to come to confront its own reality. Reality which, at least in part, must have been known to many people in leadership and other positions for many years. Because it's taken the Church so long, and indeed has been led to confront the issue, I assume all of you are conscious that the credibility in the public mind has suffered an enormous blow. And there will be those who say to the Church, well, you say all these good things now that you've been confronted with your own reality. How is it that we can accept what you say? What are the signs that people should understand that what you're saying is that the Church accepts its own reality and is prepared to make the changes, some of which, as you know, have already been discussed during the course of this hearing? What do you say, and what ultimately do all of you say to the community?
Your Honour, I think we start by getting on our knees and saying we're profoundly and deeply sorry. It has taken the genius of the Royal Commission to put a mirror in front of us in a prophetic way to say you're not doing what your mission says you're to do, and you're not even doing what is basic requirements of Australia. So there's a massive failure in our mission in this particular regard, particularly to vulnerable people, children, young children. So that's the first point I would want to make is that we have messed up. We've done wrong, and we're not being contrite in a superficial way. I mean, I can't think of another area of church life over the years that I've been involved with the Catholic Church in leadership, where it has struck the inner core of us. The second thing is, it's not enough just to say sorry. We are the people who say we are sorry and we will try not to sin again. So the second part is to generally working with the Royal Commission and the new world that is now opening up to assure people that things are becoming different. And I'm not saying that we've already arrived there. But we must be able to work more transparently with government agencies to share what's going on in us, not to be so in-house, not to sort of think that we're a bubble in an environment to separate, or on another orbit from the orbit of Australia. Coming together on this is something that is a present and future challenge. So I can only really say that, Your Honour, heartfelt, the sorrow and the determination to move on from here with the help of others.
One of the issues that surfaced in the course of the recent hearing, which is repeated over and over again, is the issue of clericalism.
Yes.
The special place that's been given to the priest, which has provided the power and the access to children with the tragedies that have occurred. Now, you can imagine that many people reading about this commission and watching the screen will be asking the question, well, what are you going to do about clericalism? Do you have an answer to that question?
Well, globally, I would say that clericalism is the abuse of power. I mean, every time we Christians talk about power, it's for service. Now, it's been subverted through all sorts of reasons. In some cases, not to serve, but to thwart. And thwart the most vulnerable. This is the tragedy. This is the incredible tragedy. Now, how has that happened? We need to be able to look at that further and further. I would have thought, in regard to seminary training, and also after a priest is ordained, that we're beginning to put into a different mindset to be able to weed out those who are attracted to ministry, because it gives them some sort of power to be in awe of others. There's a psychological component here, a way of screening people. There's also a way of monitoring them over a period of time. But I would have thought that that's a way to start, to sort of basically to define what it is, and then to sort of say, well, listen, if it's a bit like if I could use the word sin, it's the word we use, you know, there's an offence here, but it's a social, there's a structural aspect to this sin. It's a dis-ease, as it were. And clericalism is a dis-ease or an abuse of that which is precious and can bring about our missionary and our religious aims. But the religious aim is cut off, and when that's cut off, all of a sudden you open yourself up for people who are what is their intention? Why are you involved in the children's ministries and what have you? So that's where we have to have proper screening and a proper education in this to be able to work on this problem in a more focused manner.
Some would describe clericalism as the culture that the church nurtured that put the priest on a pedestal, with the consequence that lay people, particularly in what we've seen many, many times, is the mother of the child who has absolute trust in the priest, because that's the way the priest is represented in the church community. And of course that trust is breached. It's that sort of, as it were, base level of culture that is often identified as being the problem with clericalism. How do you address that?
Yes, I think it's very true, Your Honour, what you're saying. And in fact, when talking to victims over the years, that's precisely been what's happened, is that the incredible trust given has been abused by, for instance, the priest. How do we move on from that? Well, I think it's we've got to start with those even knocking at the door of the seminary for us. So it's got to start right there. There is a certain pathology to the paedophilia that we're now aware of, and move away from just a moral indiscretion those days, certainly that, but we've moved on from that, but the pathology of it, the grammar, the chemistry of paedophilia is something that we're becoming more and more aware of. So therefore, once knowing the disease, I think the medicine to eradicate that becomes a little bit more obvious. I think sometimes the medicine offered was not really based on a proper diagnosis. This is where I think being able to defer to the social sciences, the psychologies, the expectations in the corporate world about these methods, monitoring of these things can be very, very helpful to us. So it's a long-term chapter I think we're now moving away from a naivety perhaps in this area before. Might I say, though, on the other hand, that I think, for instance, in seminary training, it's quite different now than it was, say, in the 1950s and 60s. Quite different. The movement of lay people into the mix, especially in parish settings, where focus groups with families, with intelligent, prudent lay people coming to able to help us to monitor possible future priests is a plus. And these issues of lording it over, a clerical approach, can be monitored a lot more, I think, a lot more quickly than in times past. I think that's a positive way on a long journey ahead.
Can I just return and follow on from the Chair's earlier question about how the community can trust and believe that the Church is genuine in its mission of change. Am I right in perceiving, Archbishop, that you personally had no real appreciation of the scale and nature of what had happened to the Catholic Church in Australia with respect to the volume of child sexual abuse and the numbers of perpetrators within the Church? Did that come as a surprise to you?
Well, Commissioner, the data that the Royal Commission has more recently given us in these weeks is the first time I've seen creditable data nationally, and it has shocked me personally.
Was it a surprise when you first saw it?
Yes, it was, to get a national portrait of it and the huge numbers, you know, the thousands, and to know.
Well, the point to my question is this. One thesis is that the culture of secrecy and of cover-up dictated from the Vatican downwards has meant that bishops themselves in each of their dioceses have been isolated from true knowledge. If that thesis is accurate, it means that one of the mechanisms for change must surely be much stronger demand for internal accountability and external transparency by the Church. And I did not hear that in your answer to the Justice's question.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner, because I would want to validate exactly what you said then. I mean, we do need to have, if I can go back to my image of this as a disease or a scourge, we do need to have a national, international, local data on it so that we can see that which is in front of us, and to have that as a starting point to see, well, if that's the illness, if that's the scourge, what should the medicine be? And I think that which you've just mentioned there is helpful in the sense that the protocols, the way of looking at this disease, the way of moving forward must be, first of all, predicated by the fact that we, as it were, know the beast, rather than to dim it down and we'll say, oh, well, this is just a passing phase, or this was just an indiscretion on a local level, or no, it's something far greater than that. And I think the Royal Commission has really helped us forced us to see this in a way that is painful, but I think ultimately helps us on the road to to doing something really helpful about it and moving on from there.
Attached to that question of mine is a question to you as to whether you believe personally, and you believe your colleagues understand, that cover-up, secrecy, or institutional response, in fact, does far more damage to the church and has been a thoroughly damaging approach. Is that understood in the change that you're instituting?
Yes, I believe it is understood here in Australia more and more. We're really talking about a double affliction, the perpetrator afflicting the innocent one, and then secondly, a regenerating of the removal, the forcing again of that person to feel a victim when they face the church rather than as a wounded healer coming towards us. Many have said, yes, no, we've been very happy with the church's response, but too many have said, indeed, that they were victimised again by an uncaring wall of the institutional church, which, of course, very much bishops must take responsibility for. So in what I'm suggesting with the Institute, I want to make a very honest and fresh beginning to say, no, I will not hide myself behind the walls. I want to be able to work in an interdisciplinary way with not only church people, but also those governmental ones, ombudsman, police, to be able to respond to this.
What we are discussing is really the systems of the church which have resulted in secrecy and cover-up. Yes. As I understand the Catholic Church's system of appointment, a bishop such as you, an archbishop, is directly responsible to the Pope. Do you have the courage to say to the Pope and the Vatican, no more secrecy, no more cover-up, much more transparency, much more internal and external accountability? Is that change there in your heart?
Commissioner, in regard to the appointment of a bishop?
No, I'm talking in regard to the issue of child sexual abuse.
Yes.
You see, what prevailed was secrecy, cover-up, and poor process, which has damaged the church.
Yes.
You're responsible to the Pope. You've got the courage to say to whoever the Pope is, no more of that?
I certainly, if I had the opportunity, most certainly, and certainly to the Pope's representatives here in Australia, the nuncio, and yes, this is where we need to move in this direction. And I believe Pope Francis is hearing this, and I can see that some of his even more recent statements and the setting up of international structures now are beginning to move in this direction of greater accountability. He describes the sex abuse as the sin that shames us all, and I think that's a good way of offering what the Church is saying at the moment and moving into a greater openness to be able to respond to this scourge in our midst and to do something that would really turn the tide. And if that means the secrecy aspects need to be looked at more seriously, certainly. But exactly what that word secrecy means, it would need to be worked out at different levels.
Well, in your language, it means that the issue has been kept in-house until recent years.
Well, I think in regard to what's happening now, yes, you can see there's a big difference. Yes, it's sort of I think the gravity of the sex abuse is really starting to dawn on us, and we can see that, no, we simply don't have the resources on our own to be able to cope properly with this. And even if we did, it's not appropriate. It's the days of us just in-house looking at these issues on our own, those days are gone. And apart from that, with the government structures up now and the legislation, which is very helpful, helps us to say that I, as a archbishop, for instance, I can't be making unilateral decisions about these matters without going to these other instrumentalities and working through it that way.
Archbishop, you have given evidence of wanting to and indeed having walked with victims and
Yes.
heard what they had to say. But isn't it only as recent as last November that you were invited to a healing ceremony at the Maris Brothers College or school and you refused to go?
Well, that was a mistake on my part. I had a perspective of waiting till the Royal Commission concludes here, and then as a bishop looking after the entire Archdiocese to begin walking with the sex abuse victims and their families, listening to them, and then working towards some sort of appropriate liturgy, perhaps a liturgy of lament. I found, but I was then corrected by the victims, and they lamented that I wasn't there. And I thought about it, and I agreed with them. I made a public apology and asked for forgiveness for that. It was a mistake on my part. I had more of a diocesan perspective rather than just the local one.
It was a very recent mistake, if I can suggest that,
Yes.
Bishop, and somewhat at odds with the evidence you're giving about how you have learnt from the Royal Commission, which has now been sitting for 4 years,
Yes.
and are taking a more survivor-oriented approach. What do you say about that?
I agree with you. It was a mistake, and I made a public apology, and I regret that, and I'm sorry for it.
What are you sorry for?
That I didn't attend. I didn't attend that ceremony.
Have you since attended something similar?
Well, I have with families, yes, but not in a public way. Yes, when I've been with families and at the resolution of that, yes, there's been the lament and all that's an important aspect at that time.
In your archdiocese, since you've been in the position, has there been any public gathering or public occasion upon which you have given your comments or thoughts in relation to child sexual abuse?
In written form, yes, but and with my church gatherings, yes, with my priests and with people in deanery assemblies, yes, I bring it up very often. But
in terms of a public forum?
Yes, in a public forum, no, I'm waiting. That, to me, is the next step which I want to do. I feel that confessing, there's still the time for the confessing and the bringing that out. From that, I would like to think that we can then move to more of a liturgical response. But I have been in public forums, yes, on the ecumenical dimension. Yes, there was a very big public forum at Parliament House there recently on an ecumenical level, and I was with ecumenical leaders from Canberra. But it wasn't a Catholic Church one. So the answer to your question is no, I haven't on the Catholic Church aspect, public forum. Looking forward to do that. Yes, I have done that in the ecumenical dimension on a public level.
When you're saying you're looking forward to doing it, what's stopping you?
As I mentioned, that I want the stories to come out, which are coming out still, even now, through the Royal Commission, more and more victims are coming forward. When will that decrease? I don't know. But once I think the Royal Commission finishes, to me, it's a bit of a one chapter begins, another it ends, one chapter is about to begin. So I would like to think that would be the appropriate time. Maybe I'm wrong on that, and I'm happy to revise that opinion. But there is something in my mind that tends to think that a gathering together for a more prayer-focused apology is perhaps it's just from a whole archdiocese is on the way. But I would like to get to engage more and more with groups of victims to be able to walk with them towards that, rather than as we parachute into a liturgy and then sort of to be in that sense a little bit just a bit thin on in my mind, at any rate.
You would understand, wouldn't you, that there would be those in your archdiocese who would say that you have had years to walk with them, and that you have had years, particularly during this Royal Commission, to hear their stories, yes. And therefore why are you still waiting to take the step you've referred to?
Well, I have seen victims one-for-one in small groups, in families and what have you, but collectively, as in bigger groups, not yet, but I want to do that.
The data you referred to before would have told you that in the Diocese of Sale, where you were bishop for a time, 15.1% of priests were identified as having claims made against them. You understand that?
Yes, I am.
And that's over double what was the average.
Yes, I was very surprised to see that huge statistic.
Can you help us with how that might have happened in that diocese?
Well, we're going back to 1950. I haven't got the statistics on me, but I know that there were some priests there, that there was multiple incidences there, and I really was surprised with that huge statistic and would want to look at it more fully to see how that is the case. Yes, but whilst I was there, I was quite happy with the way that we were able to set up structures whereby when cases came towards us, we were able to respond to them. But yes, again, it's a tragedy. It's a tragic statistic.
You can't help us any more on your thoughts as to why it might have happened in that diocese where you were bishop for a time?
Yes. I would have thought that there seemed to be in some areas of the Diocese of Sale, perhaps more so than in a big city, an extraordinary trust of the local priest, whereby he was able to really become part of the family in a way that perhaps wouldn't have been so in a bigger city. We're talking about regional areas. I think that was a breeding ground for immature and disconnected priests to be able to move into that area, perhaps more so numerically than in a bigger city where getting to know the priest is not as easy as in a country area where the priest is sort of like knows everybody's name, and so I would have thought that would be something that struck me as one possibility to think about.
And what do you do in your current archdiocese to ensure that access is lessened or in some way mitigated in order for the abuse not to occur?
Well, first of all, I think the scrutiny of the priests, working with children's check, the more vigorous professional standards in servicing of priests and church employees, a greater awareness of the situations that people ought to avoid, or making sure that there's other adults there. These are things that I think are helpful in the present moment.
I think you've also found Chapter 16A helpful, which is of the New South Wales child protection legislation, which enables you to exchange information with other agencies.
Yes, I think that's very helpful, and there's a greater way of being able to see what's happening, to working together. So it's a better situation where I'm forever working in a team in this area rather than just on my own.
And you can't do that in the Australian Capital Territory, can you?
Well, yes, I can, but I want to do it in a way that's consistent with New South Wales, which I think that the bar is higher. So I want to raise the bar, encourage the ACT to be consistent with the New South Wales one.
You would be in favour of an information exchange regime like there is in New South Wales throughout Australia?
I would. I'd encourage it.
Now, mandatory reporting for priests varies around Australia, with the Northern Territory having all adults required to report to child protection authorities. What's your view on whether priests should be required to report risk of harm or significant risk of harm of children to the child protection authorities?
Well, I'm very sympathetic to it. Of course, it does bring up the issue of the confession seal, which I notice has been a topic here over these weeks. But yes, I think to do something where this is happening already with school teachers, isn't it, in the teaching setting, and therefore the door should be open to dialogue in regard to extending that.
Well, I'm opening the door to dialogue.
Yes, yes.
Archbishop, what's your view?
Well, I think it's a good idea. I think I would need to again discuss that, precisely what the legislation might mean, what it would include, what it would not include. But I think that would be a pathway that I think would be very positive.
Just finally, Archbishop, you'll understand that the Commonwealth has responded to the Royal Commission's recommendation for a national redress scheme.
Yes.
And as far as one currently knows, there may well be a provision for individual dioceses like yourself to opt into it.
Yes.
Have you given thought to that?
Yes, I have, and we would opt into it.
Thank you.
Very positively.
Can I turn to you, Archbishop Porteous?
Yes.
You've provided a statement to the Royal Commission.
That's correct, yes.
And your statement stated the 6th of October 2016.
That's correct, yes.
And are the contents of that true and correct?
They are.
Thank you. Now, Archbishop, you were originally ordained as a priest of the Archdiocese of Sydney in 1974.
That's correct, yes.
And became an auxiliary bishop in September 2003.
Correct.
And you were installed as Archbishop of Hobart in September 2013.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Now, in terms of your Archdiocese engagement with children, is it similar to your colleague, mainly in the education field?
It's mainly education. We have 16,000 children in our schools in Tasmania. The other area, of course, is Catholic Care, which is our social welfare agency. We run, for instance, preschool and out-of-school programs there, and obviously other areas of family counselling that may involve children as well. So the main two agencies, apart from the parishes, would be Catholic Education and Catholic Care.
Thank you. Now, you may well have heard some evidence last week, Archbishop, about formation and seminaries. Mm-hmm. You're aware of that?
I am, yes.
And there was evidence from a number of sources about a trend towards young seminarians wishing to and reverting to the old ways of undertaking their work. You're aware of that evidence?
I am, yes, yes.
And evidence was given that young priests and seminarians were more inclined to wear the dress that's particularly associated with priests, the soutane as well, mm-hmm. as well as wanting to revert to the liturgy in Latin and the like. Mm-hmm. Now, is that something that you yourself have observed?
It's probably make a distinction between the time that I was rector of the seminary and currently. If I speak currently, firstly, I'm aware that is a tendency around. I wouldn't say very clearly it's not every seminarian. It's some who desire the more traditional expressions of priestly life and priestly garb, but it's certainly not universal. If I could speak, I have 8 seminarians. It's not a factor among any of my seminarians.
Was it when you were rector?
Well, when I was rector, generally I'd say no. When I was rector of the seminary, one of the small things I did was looked at the question of modes of dress, and the thing I required of the seminarians was they wear a collar, just an open neck shirt collar, so rather than a t-shirt or something. They wear trousers rather than, say, shorts or jeans. They wear shoes rather than runners. So just to develop a more I don't know what the right word is, but a basic standard of dress for around the seminary when they were going to lectures and so on. The only time we would wear the soutane would be at Sunday Mass and also when we have major liturgical events. So I didn't find any great issue with that. The seminarians accepted it. I think some were drawn a bit, but generally speaking, that was the culture of the seminary.
And is it a culture that you believe is an appropriate one for the church?
I think culture is a very important issue, and I think it's we've already had a discussion about the question of clericalism. I think we have to make a distinction between, if you like, a priestly culture, just as any profession has a culture. So the legal profession has a culture, police, the doctors, any profession, particularly those that are geared as professions to helping others, do have a certain culture which captures, I think, the highest ideals. So the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of justice would be something very normal. The care of the sick and suffering would be for doctors and nurses and so on. So that every particular profession has ideals that motivate and inspire those who embrace the profession. That's what I call a culture, and I think that's a very important thing and something we would want to encourage. And certainly as a rector of a seminary and also now as bishop, that's something I very much encourage, a positive culture for seminarians and for priests. Where culture can break down is when, firstly, an individual fails to live up to its ideals, or worse still, when somebody quite deliberately betrays the culture. And as you know, in many other professions, we have various programs where people can be taken, disciplinary boards and so on, where people can be then disciplined by their peers when they're not measuring up to the ideals of the culture. So clericalism is the abuse of the priestly culture, where there is a focus on maybe standing status, a focus on maybe demanding certain things. I'd say that's an abuse of the priestly spirit, the priestly culture.
Is it your view that the tsunami, as it's been described, of child sexual abuse within the church is largely a product of the acts of individuals?
Largely the acts of individuals. Could you explain that, if you mind?
Well, those individuals who perpetrated the abuse and those individuals who failed to respond appropriately to the abuse. Is that where you lay responsibility?
I would see clearly where somebody was a perpetrator of abuse, that there were circumstances in their own life, their own mentality, their own understanding of sexuality, maturity and so on. These were probably significant factors in influencing behaviour, which was a betrayal of their priesthood, if we're talking about priests.
And do you see the structure and governance of the church, indeed the culture of the church, having any role to play in the extent of child sexual abuse by clergy and religious?
I think certainly my own experience has been that over the period of years, and we probably go back to 1990s when these issues started to seriously emerge, that we've all been on a process of learning and discovery and this Royal Commission has highlighted things that before I hadn't given consideration to. So my own experience was one of learning and coming to understand things that I hadn't really understood before. I think the church was in a similar situation. I think firstly the church did not understand how much damage was done by sexual abuse.
Bishop, but in terms of your current views, do you see that there has been any structural or governance or cultural matters within the church that must take some responsibility for the extent of child sexual abuse by clergy and religious?
I certainly think historically that'd be the case. I think now we are moving forward in a whole variety of ways, alerted to the issues so much more than we've ever been before. And this has been a very good thing.
What were the structural issues in the past, do you think, that played a role?
I think one thing very clearly was nobody understood the seriousness of the effects of sexual abuse on children. And now I think myself as a bishop, having met with a number of victims of sexual abuse, I've become acutely aware of the extraordinary harm and damage that has been done to people's lives. Something I didn't personally understand before. I'm now acutely aware of it and acutely aware that this must completely be eradicated because of the extraordinary damage that's done.
Archbishop, the Council asked you about structural issues. Doesn't seem your response was a response to that question.
I might need some further clarification. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you're asking.
Do you see that there was anything in the structure or the way in which the church was governed that played a role in the extent of child sexual abuse by clergy and religious? You answered in respect of knowledge, not structure.
Yes, not structure, I see. I think the structures, again, correct me if I'm not answering your question, the structures certainly relate to the lack of appropriate formation of candidates and the lack of understanding or action by the church in appropriately responding when there were complaints come forward. So I don't know if that's answering it appropriately or not.
Was there anything you think to do with the autonomy of the bishop and the way in which power operated within the church that played a contributing role?
If I go back to what I was saying before about culture, the power can be used for good, but power can also be misused, sometimes inadvertently. Sometimes somebody is not aware and acts appropriately in a situation. I think that's what has happened in the past, that I think as bishops, not being aware of the significance, we didn't respond appropriately to issues as they came up. So I think we did fail because we weren't aware of the significance of what was taking place, particularly in the life of the victim, nor understanding the seriousness of the issues in the perpetrator. There was a time when there was a view that a person could correct it or with psychological help overcome it. We've come to realise now, no, that's not possible. So,
Bishop, you're still not addressing the question.
Sorry.
The question is, why did it happen in the first place?
Why did what happen, Your Honour?
Why did priests abuse? Not the question of what was the reaction of the church once we knew, or you knew that the priest was abusing, but why did priests abuse? So many priests and religious abuse children. Are there structural reasons in the church, is the question you're being asked?
Sure.
Are there cultural reasons in the church? Is there a failure to create a proper relationship between the clergy and religious and the lay members of the church? These are the questions you're being asked to address, not how did the church fail in its response, but why did it happen at all? Can you help us?
I'd like to. I do find it very difficult to be able to answer that question. That there was, particularly at some time historically, which was a little bit before my time, that this was happening at the rate it was. I don't understand enough of why that was the case. Clearly, there were issues related to the sense of identity of the priest that may have been a factor. I struggle to understand why it was so widespread, why there were so many priest perpetrators. Are there structural things? There probably were, some that didn't, as I would see now, effectively overcome the issue. What they were, I find difficult to actually grasp.
It seems from your answer to that question and earlier questions, Archbishop, that your view is that it was the responsibility and perhaps fault of individuals who perpetrated the abuse and individuals who responded inadequately to the abuse. Is that right?
That's correct. But I did also mention that organisations have cultures, and there can be times when that culture is not working for the good of what the professional or the particular organisation should be doing. Clearly, there were some elements there. I can't quite identify them, but I think clearly there were factors there, and perhaps it had a lot to do with a sense of wanting the church to be, as we often talk about, avoiding scandal. I think that was probably one issue that we didn't want to inform more broadly the community of failures. I think that would be one thing.
That's addressing the issue after it's happened. Councils seeking out, look, can I put it on the table?
Sure.
We've had evidence that a contribution to this problem was made by the Church's requirement for celibacy.
Oh, okay.
Religious and priests. We have had over and over again people tell us it's clericalism. It's because the Church expressed a particular value in the clergy, which put them on a pedestal as against the layperson, distorted the culture of the Church. The whole power structure in the Church was altered to the detriment of children. Now, these are the issues that are on the table. Do you have any comment about any of these?
Yes, sorry, Your Honour, the first point you raised was celibacy. Sorry.
See, we've had evidence that it's made a contribution, not the cause, but it's contributed to the problem. And you would understand many, many people hold that view, perhaps uninformed, but nevertheless hold that view.
Yes,
the Church has to answer that question.
Yeah. I understand that that's often what people say, it's because of celibacy. I'm personally not convinced that celibacy per se is the issue. I think formation for people to live the celibate life is a very important aspect. So not celibacy as such, but how people understand it and live it. I'm aware that celibacy is not unique to the Catholic Church. It's, say, Buddhism, for instance, has a strong tradition of celibate monks. So it is a feature of religious bodies.
We don't know anything about the behaviour of monks, though.
No, I don't. But what I'm saying, if we were to say that this is just a Catholic issue, celibacy is more broadly. Yeah,
that may be so, but it doesn't address the issue. Has it contributed to the sexual abuse of children within the Catholic Church?
My view is that some priests who have not adequately developed a mature approach to issues of sexuality, of effective maturity, of ability to live the celibate life, have failed, and it's been a failure in their commitment to the ideals of the priesthood. I believe that it's not a sole determinant of this. It's to do more with the individuals and their maturity.
But if you were to take celibacy away and allow priests to marry, would that reduce the risk? That'll be another question that people ask. Bearing in mind that, as we understand it, not all Catholic religious or priests are celibate.
The question of whether there will be
openly or otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. The question of whether changing the Church's laws on celibacy would, in fact, be in itself a change in the possibilities of sexual abuse. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that would be the case. My view is that it has more to do with the appropriate formation of people in living the celibate life.
Can I just clarify, and Ms Vanessa has raised it, but it's quite significant. In the evidence given by Dr Marie Keenan at the beginning of this, and in the written evidence that we have before us, she says two things. If I just read them to you. She says, by implication, the assumption is that the sexual abuse of a child by Catholic clergy is the result of the individual pathology or predisposition, a theory that is favoured by some men in leadership in the Catholic Church. She then goes on to say these two things. In order to understand clerical men who have sexually abused minors, one can come to no other conclusion but that their sexual offending must be understood within the unique context of their lives and ministries as Roman Catholic ministers within the Roman Catholic Church. And later she says, the features of the institutional church that are said to contribute to a climate in which sexual abuse by Catholic clergy becomes possible includes a number of things. The theology of sexuality, the ecclesiastical structure of power relations and hierarchical authority, clerical culture, seminary formation, and so on. Are we to understand that you fundamentally, however, hold the first view, that at the end of the day, the sexual abusing was fundamentally a failure of the individual, as Ms Vanessa has put it to you? Or do you accept the research and the evidence of people we've heard that, in fact, the unique features of the Catholic Church, multiple features, contributed to the offending within the Catholic Church? Do you accept that proposition, even if you have doubts about some of the elements of that?
I do. I would agree that these elements are factors that would come into play. They are factors I think we as bishops have become aware of and are seeking now to address in a variety of ways.
So if we to move forward, Archbishop, if you were to look at each element in and of itself and by itself, such as clericalism, such as celibacy, or any of the other matters that I've just outlined, one could argue effectively that none of those in and of themselves caused or contributed significantly. But the argument that's being put and the evidence being put by many people, including that which I've just said, is that it is the combination of those factors, each of which contributed variously. And therefore looking at each element is in fact an impossible way to see this problem and to resolve it. What do you think about that proposition?
Again, I wouldn't dispute that it's not one element in itself, but a number of elements can contribute to a certain extent, creating a certain culture where that can take place. And as I mentioned before, these are things that we now have greater clarity about and are seeking to address.
So just to take the point that His Honour was raising in relation to celibacy, is the Church willing to look at celibacy in the context of a range of factors that have given rise to risks, given rise to offences, and given rise to poor responses, rather than to look at each component as an isolated issue, in which you might come to a very different answer than if you were looking at them collectively, as the research indicates that one should?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm just...
So are you prepared to look at the issues as a collective of issues, rather than as each separate item, where you could come to a very different view is if you looked at it in isolation of the other issues? In other words, it's the whole rather than the individual parts.
Yes, with the comment that if those elements are being individually identified and we are working towards, we're creating a different culture for the future.
You see, Archbishop, what exercises many minds is this, following on from that proposition. If the past claims history provided to us by the Catholic Church indicates that 1 in 14 or 7% of priests engaged in sexual activity with children, and that collective package of issues is not addressed, what is there to reassure the community that going forward we still don't have 7% or 1 in 14 priests who have a sexual interest in children, and therefore the community will feel unsafe in your church? So that's the issue,
Sure.
is that it's not about the past, it's about the package of things which creates this risk and makes the church unsafe for children, has made it.
I fully understand. And I'd have to say very honestly that it will depend on our ability as a church as a whole to come to terms with these various issues, both collectively and also look at them individually, to then take the necessary steps to ensure that that mix of things is changed, that the culture is changed to eliminate possibilities in the future.
You see, we recognise that safeguarding children processes are better and opportunities have been reduced.
Yeah.
So that side of it has been addressed. But we remain with the difficulty that the research and evidence provided to us shows that nothing overall has changed much in the Catholic Church institutional, structural setup. And that's with regard to celibacy, formation, selection. There have been some changes perhaps in selection formation, but not much in the other issues and clericalism and so on.
If I may speak, I was rector of a seminary for 7 years and now bishop of a diocese. One of the things that has been foremost in my own mind is seeking to create a positive environment for the priests, and particularly emphasising priestly fraternity, trying to work in a very positive way to create the healthiest environment for priests, so that can assist them in their own growth and maturity. In the seminary, as I reflect back on what was fundamental in my own approach as rector, I think two words captured what I was trying to do. One was the word service, that I kept many times saying to the seminarians, as I say now to priests, that their role is to serve, to try to break down any sense of prerogatives of power or influence or whatever, to say that we adopt the attitude of being a servant. And so I'm trying, doing that in the seminary and also in my own diocese, to encourage that attitude, which I think is a key attitude to having the right dispositions of mind in relationships with other people. The second quality I've often spoken about is the importance of humility. And again, this goes back to any sense of authority or any rights or claims to anything that might accrue by the virtue of being a priest. So one of the things I've often encouraged in both seminarians and priests are these sorts of qualities which I'm hoping will bring about a cultural change or advance the culture of the priesthood in a healthy way, to create a better environment where some of these other cultural elements you mentioned before won't be factors in priests failing in this area.
I'm not sure, and I'll conclude on this basis, I'm not sure that will reassure those who fear that will not address the 1 in 14 chance of somebody having a sexual interest in children. That's my reaction to your reply.
Could I make one final comment, if I may? Again, I'll go back to my time as rector particularly. It was one of the other areas that was of paramount importance to me, particularly after I was rector just after the revelation to the situation in Boston, and that really focused my own attention on this area. And so I was, as rector, I was very conscious to ensure that the seminarians coming through developed and had a healthy maturity in the sexual area, so that we weren't having people come through who had the deficiencies that might later on find expression in sexual abuse of minors. So I was very conscious of that and did work and at times acted to ensure that candidates coming through as best I could, I felt that they had the maturity, the sexual maturity, the affective maturity to be able to be good and effective priests.
How do you do that, Archbishop?
You do it firstly. One of the advantages, I know there's been some comment about the structure of seminaries. One advantage, certainly in my time in the seminary, was I had a seminary of up to about 40 students. It meant, and I was basically with them for 7 years over the bulk of each year. You see them in all sorts of situations. You have a chance to really get to know them, and other formation staff really get to know the students. It's pretty hard. Somebody can come in and present in a certain way, but over time you get to see the true qualities of the person. So one of the advantages of our seminary system is that you are able to have those in key formational roles can have very close relationship with each of the students to assess their suitability, their growth, their development. Now in the seminaries, there's a lot more focus given to goal setting and reflection at the end of the year. You know, the formators would identify perhaps a personal issue that, look, I think you need to work on this issue. Let's see how we go at the end of the year. So there's this.
Can I ask you to pause?
Yeah.
How do you assess their sexual maturity? What do you do in order to satisfy yourself this person is, as you put it, sexually mature and it won't be a problem?
Obviously, my own growth and knowledge of that person is the key. The other thing, obviously, is if there were incidences that took place that caused you to have alarm in one way or another. So something may crop up, something may happen, and then that would be a red flag, and you'd then look at it more carefully. So we would do the best we could to observe, and if we were concerned about a particular student, something happened, then we would consult and address the issue.
Do you have any professional people carry out assessment?
We had, I had a professional psychologist who was on call, and on a couple of occasions I asked students, obviously you've got to respect their freedom, to say, we think it would be good for you if you went along and spoke to the psychologist on this particular issue. And in some cases it worked very, very well, very helpful.
You would have been aware, just related to that matter, of the evidence of Geraldine Robinson, where she indicated that for those that are going to violate boundaries, both with children and with adults, it's likely to happen around the time of ordination into the diaconate and within 2 years of the ordination of the priests. And indeed, her evidence was it's very unlikely that you'll pick up people at the beginning of the process. If that evidence is correct, does it indicate that there's something missing in both seminary training and early ordinees when they're out that we need to look at as a church? Because if that is true, the efforts in the beginning to look at what's happening is important, but in fact is not in fact the main time at which these behaviours, these boundary violations or abusive behaviours become evidenced.
Certainly my own attitude is to ensure that a deacon or a newly ordained priest are placed with a very good priest in the parish. The normal practice would be somebody would be assigned to a parish. One of the things that, as I do, I would speak to that priest fairly regularly, just to say, how's the young fella going, any issues, I'd keep monitoring. Now, I can do that because I'm in a relatively small diocese, so it's not difficult for me to be able to monitor the young priests and to ensure that there are, again, no red flags, no issues emerging that we might need to address. Yeah.
Archbishop, at that time when you were the rector and the issues came out at Boston, it sounds to me as though you acted on your own initiative in that regard in terms of putting into place strategies for seminary. Was there any, though, support that you had or groundswell of concern in Tasmania, the church hierarchy, or even throughout Australia, as saying, well, here are the lessons of Boston, look what's happened there. We need to know what's happened here, and we need to mitigate risk and do all we can. Was there any sense of that, or you're on your own with that?
Well, at that stage I was in Sydney, and the seminary was the Seminary of the Good Shepherd. But I think, again, it's hard to remember back exactly, but I do remember that those revelations had a very significant impact on me.
So did you discuss that with anyone?
And then I discussed it. We discussed it with the formation staff, and I think we were of a mind that we need to take note of what's happened, and then I know personally I looked more seriously at what can we do to improve the formation in this particular area. So it did.
Beyond that, though,
sorry?
Do you think perhaps it went beyond that? What do we have to do to ensure that what's happened in Boston isn't happening here?
At that stage, I think my my world, if you like, was the formation of men for the priesthood. That was my responsibility. So a lot of the focus, and I was at that point, I wasn't a bishop, I was the rector of the seminary. So I put my focus very much on looking at the ways we could improve the formation of men in this area.
And did you have a sense that in relation to the leadership of the church at that time, because I imagine you at least engaged with the people running the other seminaries at that time?
The seminary rectors had a practice of once a year coming together for a 4 or 5 day session. This was Australia and the Pacific. We all met together and normally had some in-servicing, if you like. Lecturers come in, give us talks, and these issues would have been discussed.
The Boston issue?
Yes, I'm just trying to remember, but certainly, I was particularly interested in what Melbourne, which was the other the two large seminaries at that point were Sydney and Melbourne. So I was particularly interested in what Melbourne was doing and trying to learn from their approach.
And do you get a sense that was at the level above the seminaries at the time, that concern about Boston? Was it at a level of concern with the Bishops' Conference, or can't you help us with it?
I couldn't answer that because I don't know what happened at the Bishops' Conference. Certainly it occurred after the church had been engaged in developing towards healing and so forth. So the church was aware of it. I suppose it came home to me very dramatically at a personal level at that time.
It's pretty significant. You mentioned earlier culture, and you talked about police. And starting in the late 80s, there were a number of corruption inquiries in relation to police departments throughout Australia. And some of the lessons there were they were, at the time, largely male-dominated, hierarchical organisations. And the culture was so powerful that wrongdoing by police, who take an oath to protect the public and enforce the laws, was supported and acknowledged by others. Do you think that perhaps the parallels with what happened in the church as well?
I think that's a very good instance. What the Royal Commissions did was highlight, again, if I say the culture basically is a good thing. We need cultures in various professions, and they should enshrine the highest ideals. But you can also have a situation where there's a serious corruption of that culture taking place, particularly maybe at leadership level or perhaps groups within it. So I think that's something we have to be conscious of too, and it could happen again, that we need to say we must make sure that the culture of the priesthood is always set at the highest levels, and if there is betrayal of that culture, and particularly in an individual or maybe a certain attitude of being separated or having some sort of false approach to the culture, that we need to deal with that and seek to eradicate it, because it is corrosive, it is damaging to the good of the profession, if I could use that, as a whole.
Could I just ask you this, though? Probably in any occupational profession there is a culture that understandably perhaps might protect someone who's lazy or protect someone who is drinking to excess. But what we are talking about here is child sexual abuse, which is a serious crime. So would you agree that it must have been an incredibly powerful culture that protected child sexual abuse?
It was a strong culture, certainly, and the culture of we spoke about secrecy, because this whole idea of scandal, I think that was a driving influence.
So coming back to the earlier discussions and his honest comments, what do we do? What needs to be done now? What needs to be done now to ensure that everything possible is done to demolish that culture and build a new one?
Can I say that I think one thing that I think will emerge from this Royal Commission is that I think we need effective auditing of dioceses as we're seeking to implement various programs. I'm hoping that one of the fruits of the Royal Commission will be a sharpening the particular questions that need to be asked, the particular issues that need to be addressed. I think, if I could use the image, it's a little bit like a financial audit. You know, every year you're financially audited. It's a good thing in the sense that you get to have a look, make sure all your programs and everything you do is correct, and there are no faults or failings in your financial dealings. In the same way, I see through developing of auditing of our processes that for me that would give greater assurance as a bishop that we are not only doing it but continuing to maintain standards. And I'm expecting actually that the first audits may bring up some things which we hadn't thought of or we weren't doing appropriately or effectively. So I'm hoping one of the great fruits of this Royal Commission will be that there will be auditing tools which are more refined and more focused, and then we can then work with auditors to ensure that we establish the standards and then we maintain them over time. I think that's the key thing.
I wanted to ask some questions afterwards of both yourself and Archbishop Prowse just going back to that organisation that you'd set up, that entity, the Institute for Professional Standards, but perhaps we could come back to that.
Well, just one question, if I might, Your Honour. Archbishop, you will understand that your Truth, Justice and Healing Council, of which you are a member, has described what happened as a massive failure of leadership. Do you accept that?
I accept that there was a failure in leadership based on a lack of understanding of the seriousness of sexual abuse, and also a lack of understanding of how it should be developed, but particularly that we should have more accountable systems of responding to sexual abuse. So there was a failure. It was grounded in some deficiencies in our understandings at that time.
So you don't accept that there was a massive failure of leadership?
I think the leadership...
The word massive is the one you...
the word massive.
Objected to before by omitting it.
Okay. I would say there was massive failure of leadership, but I would also say that it was for lack of awareness of the seriousness of child sex abuse and the lack of appropriate, or the use of appropriate ways of dealing with it.
Effectively ignorance of a few.
Yeah.
Thank you, Your Honour. Notice the time.
Yes, we'll take the morning adjournment.
Stands.